A ruthless biker leader hires a runaway bride, and the first thing he tells her is, "Tell me when it's too much." But nothing about her life has ever been gentle. She's been hunted by the people she escaped, people who believe they own her. And now, stepping into that biker's world, she thinks she's trading one danger for another, until she realizes he's the first man who's ever protected her instead of breaking her. But just when she begins to feel safe, everything explodes. A violent group comes after her, ready to drag her back, even if it means burning down everything around her to do it. And the biker who swore he'd protect her? He's suddenly forced to choose between his entire brotherhood and the terrified bride he hired to save. So when the past comes crashing in, guns blazing and secrets rising, what happens when the one place she ran to becomes the final battleground for her freedom? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The pre-dawn air bit at Ilara's cheeks as she ran through the dense pine forest. Her worn sneakers crunched over fallen needles, each step carrying her further from the commune that had been both her prison and home for the past 23 years. The backpack bounced against her spine, containing everything she dared to take, a change of clothes and her treasured notebook of forbidden poems, written in stolen moments when the compound slept. Her heart pounded against her ribs as distant shouts echoed through the trees. They'd discovered her missing. The morning bell would have revealed her empty bed, her absence from the women's dormitory impossible to hide. Ilara forced herself to keep running, even as her lungs burned and her legs trembled. "Dear God," she whispered, "please help me." The prayer came automatically, though she wasn't sure anymore whose God she was praying to, the loving father she yearned for, or the vengeful deity Pastor Wynne had wielded like a weapon. The forest eventually thinned, revealing the dusty highway she'd been aiming for. Ilara's steps faltered as she reached the road's shoulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had no plan beyond this point, just the desperate need to reach the town where she'd once found brief kindness. A rumbling in the distance made her freeze. A semi-truck approached, its headlights cutting through the gray morning mist. Ilara raised her trembling hand, thumb extended. The truck slowed, air brakes hissing as it pulled onto the shoulder. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and gray stubble, leaned out his window. "Where you headed, miss?" "Pine Valley," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Something in her face must have told him everything he needed to know. He nodded, reaching over to unlock the passenger door. "Hop in. I'm headed that way." The cab's warmth enveloped her as she climbed in. The driver, who introduced himself as Bill, didn't press her for conversation. He just turned up the heat and kept his eyes on the road, letting her gradually stop shaking. "Someone hurt you?" he asked finally, glancing at the bruises on her wrists where the prayer circle's grip had been too tight the night before. Ilara tugged her sleeves down. "I'm going somewhere safe now," she said softly. Bill nodded again, understanding in his weathered face. "Good girl." The sun was fully up by the time they reached Pine Valley. The small Colorado town hadn't changed much in the 3 years since she'd last passed through. The Mountain Reapers clubhouse stood on the outskirts, its weather-worn exterior a stark contrast to the carefully maintained motorcycles parked outside. "You sure this is where you want to be?" Bill asked, eyeing the clubhouse with concern. "Yes," Ilara said, surprising herself with her certainty. "There's someone here who helped me once." She thanked Bill, shouldering her backpack as she approached the clubhouse. Raised voices filtered through the front door, deep, male voices in heated discussion. Ilara's hand trembled as she knocked, The voices stopped. Heavy footsteps approached, and the door swung open to reveal Hawk Maddox. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and imposing, with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. He was in the middle of saying something stern to two younger club members, but the words died on his lips when he saw her. "Elara?" His voice was softer than she expected, holding none of the harshness from moments before. "I'm sorry," she began automatically, then forced herself to stop apologizing. "I didn't know where else to go. Her voice caught. "They're trying to make me marry Pastor's son. A purity binding ceremony. Tomorrow." Hawk's expression darkened. Without a word, he stepped aside, ushering her into the clubhouse. The two club members he'd been reprimanding exchanged looks, but wisely remained silent as Hawk led her to his office. The space was orderly, with a leather couch against one wall and a solid desk dominated by neat stacks of paperwork. Hawk poured her a glass of water from a pitcher, watching as she sipped it carefully. "How bad is it?" he asked after a long moment. Elara's hands tightened around the glass. "Pastor's son, Joel, he's violent. 3 girls who've married him have disappeared. They say they were called to service elsewhere, but..." She shuddered. "I couldn't stay. Not for that." Hawk was silent for several minutes, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that made her nearly drop the glass. "Marry me instead." Elara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. 6 months, he continued, his voice steady and practical. "A legal marriage would give you protection. They couldn't touch you without dealing with me and the whole club. After 6 months, if you want to move on, I'll sign whatever papers you need." The offer hung in the air between them. Elara's mind spun with the implications, the sheer magnitude of what he was suggesting. It was crazy, desperate, and yet... "Why would you do this?" she whispered. Hawk's eyes met hers. "Because 3 years ago you helped patch up my niece when she fell off her bike, even though helping outsiders was forbidden. Because you're running from something evil, and I'm in a position to help. Simple as that." Nothing about this was simple, but Elara found herself nodding. The alternative, going back, being forced into that ceremony, was unthinkable. As night fell, Hawk brought her a blanket and pillow for the office couch, ensuring the door was securely locked. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll figure out the details tomorrow." Elara lay down, pulling the soft blanket around her shoulders. The leather couch creaked as she settled, and for the first time in years, she felt her muscles truly relax. Sleep tugged at her consciousness, and questions swirled in her mind. Was this the right choice? Could she trust this man she barely knew? But beneath the questions was a profound sense of safety she hadn't experienced since childhood. The last thing she saw before drifting off was the soft glow of the desk lamp, and Hawk's silhouette through the frosted glass as he stood guard outside, keeping her protected through the night. Sunlight filtered through the office blinds when Elara woke the next morning. Her muscles ached from running, but the leather couch had provided better rest than she'd known in years. She blinked, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. A gentle knock at the door made her sit up quickly. "Come in," she called softly, smoothing down her wrinkled clothes. Hawk entered, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a worn denim jacket draped over his arm. His movements were deliberately slow and measured, as if approaching a scared animal. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "And this." He held out the jacket. "Your sweater's seen better days." Elara looked down at her thin sweater, noticing for the first time how it had been torn by branches during her escape through the forest. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting both items. The coffee was sweet and milky, exactly how she liked it, though she couldn't remember telling him her preference. "The courthouse opens at 9 o'clock, Hawk said, keeping his voice low and steady. "We should head over soon, if you're still sure about this." Elara wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, drawing strength from its heat. "I'm sure," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. After she'd changed into the jacket, which was soft from years of wear and smelled faintly of leather and motor oil, Hawk led her outside to where his motorcycle waited. But it wasn't a standard bike. It was a custom-built trike, its 3 wheels gleaming in the morning sun. "Easier to balance with. 2 people," he explained, seeing her curious look. He handed her a helmet, showing her how to adjust the straps properly. "Just hold onto my waist and lean with me into the turns. I'll take it slow." Throughout the ride to the courthouse, Hawk kept up a quiet stream of commentary, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the town's history. His deep voice, carried back to her by the wind, helped keep her grounded when the rumble of the engine threatened to trigger memories of the commune's pursuit vehicles. The courthouse was a modest brick building with white columns out front. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed quietly as they made their way to the clerk's office. The woman behind the counter raised her eyebrows at Hawk's leather vest, but processed their paperwork efficiently. "Please join hands for the exchange of vows," the clerk instructed when everything was in order. Elara tensed, her breath catching in her throat. Physical contact had been strictly controlled at the commune, used as both reward and punishment. Hawk must have sensed her distress because he turned to face her fully. "Tell me when it's too much," he whispered, his dark eyes holding hers. He extended his hand, palm up, letting her choose whether to take it. Slowly, Elara placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers curled around hers with the gentlest of pressure, warm and steady. She managed a small nod, and they turned back to the clerk. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. They exchanged basic vows, their voices echoing slightly in the empty room. When the clerk pronounced them married, Hawk squeezed her hand once before letting go, respecting her need for space. Outside, the late morning sun was bright and warm on their faces. Elara was still trying to process the reality of what had just happened when a gruff voice called out, "Hawk, what the hell is this I'm hearing?" A tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a salt and pepper beard strode toward them. This must be Bear, Hawk's second-in-command, whom she'd heard mentioned the night before. His expression was a mix of confusion and suspicion as he looked between them. "Bear," Hawk acknowledged calmly. "Meet Elara, my wife." Bear's eyebrows shot up. "Your wife? Since when do you get married without telling your second? Without telling the club?" His gaze shifted to Elara, assessing. "What's really going on here?" Elara swallowed hard, but made herself meet his eyes. "I escaped from Pine Grove Community yesterday morning," she explained, her voice quiet but steady. "They're probably already looking for me. The pastor's son. They were going to force me to marry him today." Understanding dawned on Bear's weathered face, followed quickly by concern. "Pine Grove? That cult up in the mountains?" He turned to Hawk. "You've brought their attention down on us? They're not just going to let this go." "No," Hawk agreed. "They won't." His stance shifted subtly, protective rather than defensive. "But they'll have to go through me and every Reaper to get to her." Bear ran a hand over his face, sighing heavily. "Christ, Hawk. You couldn't do anything simple, could you?" But there was a grudging acceptance in his tone. He looked at Elara again, his expression softening slightly. "Well, guess you're family now, for better or worse. We protect our own." "We need to get her somewhere safe," Hawk said. "I'm taking her up to my cabin for now." Bear nodded. "I'll put the word out. Get some eyes on the roads coming down from Pine Grove. And Hawk, He fixed his president with a stern look. Next time you decide to get married, maybe give a brother some warning. Next time? Hawk's voice held a trace of dry humor. Planning to kill me off already, Bear? The exchange seemed to ease some of the tension, though Bear's concerns had planted a seed of worry in Alara's mind. She hadn't considered how her presence might endanger the club. Hawk led her to a black pickup truck parked nearby. The cabin's about 5 miles outside town, he explained as he opened the passenger door for her. It's secluded, well protected. You'll be safe there while we figure out our next steps. As Alara climbed into the truck, she caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror. She looked different somehow, still tired and nervous, but there was something else in her eyes now. Something that looked almost like hope. Hawk started the engine, and they pulled away from the courthouse. Behind them, Bear was already on his phone, no doubt spreading the word to watch for strangers asking questions about a runaway bride. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but for the first time in years, Alara felt like she might have a chance at real freedom. And the man beside her, this unlikely protector, had given her that chance. The drive to Hawk's cabin wound through pine-covered hills, climbing steadily away from town. When they finally turned onto a narrow dirt road, Alara caught her first glimpse of what would be her temporary home. The cabin wasn't what she'd expected from a motorcycle club president. Instead of something stark or imposing, it was a welcoming structure of weathered wood and stone, with autumn flowers still blooming in window boxes. Hawk parked the truck and came around to her side, opening the door, but giving her space to step out on her own. It's not much, he said quietly, but it's peaceful here. Inside, the cabin wrapped around them in warmth and unexpected coziness. Alara's eyes wandered over handmade quilts draped across the back of a well-worn leather couch, built-in bookshelves filled with paperbacks, and framed photographs that caught afternoon sunlight. She drew closer to one particular photo, showing a woman with Hawk's same dark eyes holding a tiny baby. My sister Grace, Hawk explained softly, coming to stand beside her. And my niece Sarah. That was taken about 8 years ago. Alara noticed how his voice changed when he spoke of them, gentler, touched with both love and old pain. She wanted to ask what had happened, but sensed it wasn't the time. The bedroom's through there, he continued, gesturing to a door off the living room. It's yours. I'll take the couch. Oh, I couldn't, Alara started to protest, but Hawk shook his head. You need your own space, he said firmly but kindly. Somewhere you can close the door and feel safe. I understand that. The simple acknowledgement of her need for security made her throat tight. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Bathroom's got fresh towels, he continued. Why don't you take a shower, get comfortable? I'll make us something to eat. The bathroom was small but clean, with soft towels stacked on a shelf and a window that let in natural light. Alara turned the water as hot as she could stand it, watching as dirt and pine needles from her escape swirled down the drain. She used the basic soap and shampoo, scrubbing until her skin was pink, as if she could wash away not just the physical remnants of the commune, but its lasting touch on her soul. When she emerged, wearing the clean clothes from her backpack, the cabin smelled of garlic and herbs. Hawk stood at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta. He'd shed his leather jacket, and in just a black t-shirt and jeans, he looked less intimidating somehow. Hope spaghetti's okay, he said without turning around. It's nothing fancy. It smells wonderful, Alara replied honestly. In the commune, meals had been strictly utilitarian, seasoned only with salt and disapproval. They sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising from their bowls. Alara took a bite, and couldn't help the small sound of appreciation that escaped her. Hawk's lips curved slightly. "Been a while since you had real food?" he asked gently. Ilara twirled pasta around her fork, gathering her thoughts. "We weren't allowed. Seasonings were considered worldly indulgences. Everything was very plain. To keep us focused on spiritual matters, they said." Hawk's expression darkened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "What else weren't you allowed?" The words began spilling out then, as if they'd been waiting years to be spoken. "Books, except for approved religious texts. Music, unless it was hymns. We couldn't choose our own clothes. Everything had to be approved by the elders. No speaking to outsiders. No questioning the rules." She took a shaky breath. "Punishment, if we did." "What kind of punishment?" Hawk's question was quiet, but intent. Ilara stared down at her bowl. "Sometimes it was just extra work duties or having meals taken away. But sometimes..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Sometimes it was worse." Hawk didn't press for details, but his hand tightened on his fork until his knuckles went white. They ate in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "You're safe here," he said simply. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." A sudden sharp crack against the window made Ilara jump, her fork clattering to the table. Her heart hammered as images of angry commune members flashed through her mind. They'd found her. They were here to take her back. Hawk was already on his feet, moving with calm purpose to the window. He pulled back the curtain, revealing a pine branch swaying in the wind. "Just the tree," he said, turning back to her. "But I'll check outside to make sure." She watched through the window as he walked the perimeter of the cabin, his flashlight beam cutting through the growing dusk. When he came back inside, he didn't mock her fear or dismiss it. He simply said, "All clear. But I'll keep watching." The rest of the evening passed quietly. Hawk showed her where everything was in the kitchen and bathroom, gave her fresh linens for the bed, and answered her hesitant questions about the photographs on the walls. By 9 o'clock, exhaustion from the past 2 days caught up with Ilara. "I think I'll go to bed," she said softly. "Thank you. For everything." Hawk nodded. "Sleep well. I'll be right out here if you need anything." In the bedroom, Ilara changed into her nightclothes and slipped under the quilts. The bed was soft, nothing like the thin mattress she'd had in the commune. As she lay there, she heard a low, gentle humming coming from the living room. The sound was soothing, melodic, nothing like the harsh, judgmental voices she was used to hearing from men. It wrapped around her like a blanket, and she found herself relaxing despite everything. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was thinking how strange it was that she felt safer here, in the home of a man she barely knew, than she had in all her years at the commune. Perhaps safety wasn't about walls and rules at all, but about being truly seen and respected as a person. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin's windows as Ilara sat at the kitchen table, carefully sipping hot tea. Hawk moved around the kitchen with surprising grace for such a large man, cooking eggs and toast. The domesticity of the scene felt surreal after years of communal meals eaten in tense silence. "Do you want pepper on your eggs?" Hawk asked, his voice still morning rough but gentle. "Yes, please," Ilara replied, marveling at the simple freedom of choosing how she wanted her food seasoned. Just as Hawk set their plates down, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting as he saw Bear's name. "Morning, brother," he answered, putting the call on speaker out of respect for Ilara's right to hear. Bear's voice crackled through, tense and urgent. "We've got trouble, Hawk. Big trouble. That commune of hers? They've put out a $50,000 bounty for bringing her back." Ilara's teacup clattered against its saucer. Hawk's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. "Say that again," Hawk said, his voice dangerously quiet. $50,000 for her safe return. They're calling it a retrieval fee. Word spreading fast through some sketchy channels. Every bottom-feeding bounty hunter in 3 states will be looking for her. Ilara's hands began to shake. Hawk reached across the table, not quite touching her, but offering his presence. "We'll be at the clubhouse in 20 minutes, he said, ending the call. They abandoned their breakfast. Hawk helped Ilara into his leather jacket, the material still warm from his body. The ride to the clubhouse was tense, Ilara holding tight to Hawk's waist as the morning air whipped past them. The Mountain Reapers clubhouse was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Members stood in clusters, their conversations dying as Hawk and Ilara walked in. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Bear met them at the door, his usually steady expression clouded with worry. "Everyone's here," he said. "But Hawk, it's not good." The main room was packed with leather-clad bikers, their faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Ilara instinctively stepped closer to Hawk, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Let's hear it," Hawk said, his voice carrying across the room. One of the older members, a man with gray-streaked hair, stepped forward. "You brought this down on us, Hawk. Married some stranger without warning, and now we've got religious nutjobs putting out bounties. This isn't our fight." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ilara felt herself shrinking under their stares, years of conditioning making her want to apologize for existing. "She came to us for help," Hawk said firmly. "We don't turn away people who need protection." "She's not people, she's trouble," another member called out. $50,000 means serious players will come looking. You want to risk all our necks for one woman?" Bear cleared his throat. "We need to vote. Club rules." Hawk's hand tightened slightly on Ilara's shoulder as Bear called for the show of hands. One by one, arms raised, not in support, but in opposition to club protection. The majority was clear. They wanted no part in this fight. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Hawk moved, his actions deliberate and shocking. He shrugged off his cut, the leather vest that marked him as president, and slammed it down on the central table. "If that's how it is," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly, "I'll protect her without club backing." Gasps and mutters filled the room. A president walking away from his cut was unprecedented. Bear stepped forward, his face pained. "Brother, think about this." "I have," Hawk cut him off. "She stays under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can deal with me personally." The tension in the room was suffocating. Ilara wanted to tell Hawk not to do this, not to sacrifice his position for her, but the words wouldn't come. They left the clubhouse in heavy silence, but stopped short at the gate. There, burned into the metal in crude letters, was a message that made Ilara's blood run cold. "Return what is ours." Hawk's expression hardened. Without a word, he guided Ilara to his bike and drove them straight back to the cabin. The rest of the day was spent in focused preparation. Hawk reinforced every window with extra locks and boards, checked and double-checked the perimeter, and made sure all entrances were secured. As night fell, Ilara sat on the edge of the bed, listening to Hawk moving around in the living room. She knew he was settling in for a long night of guard duty, his dedication unwavering despite everything he'd given up that day. "Hawk?" she called softly through the partially open door. "Yeah? I'm sorry about your club." There was a pause before he answered. "Don't be. Some things are more important than patches and titles." Ilara lay down, pulling the quilts around her. Outside, crickets chirped in the darkness, and inside, she could hear the steady rhythm of Hawk's footsteps as he patrolled. The night pressed in around them, full of unseen threats. But Hawk's presence remained constant, a shield between her and the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Fear still coiled in her stomach, both for herself and for what Hawk had sacrificed. But underneath it was something else. A deep gratitude for this man who'd chosen to stand between her and harm, even at the cost of everything he'd built. Sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. Ilara stirred to the gentle sounds of movement in the kitchen and the comforting aroma of coffee. For a moment, she felt disoriented. The soft bed and quiet morning were so different from the commune's stark dormitories and harsh wake-up bells. She padded out to the kitchen in her socks, finding Hawk standing at the stove. He was stirring a pot of oatmeal, his movements precise and careful. When he noticed her, he gave a slight nod, but didn't startle her with sudden movements or loud greetings. "Morning," he said softly. "Hope you like oatmeal. Got honey and some fresh berries to go with it." "Thank you," Ilara replied, settling into a chair at the small kitchen table. She watched as he moved around the space, noticing how he telegraphed his actions, never making unexpected gestures or approaching too quickly. Even the way he set down her coffee mug was gentle, avoiding any sharp sounds that might make her jump. As they ate their breakfast, Ilara gathered her courage. "Hawk," her voice was quiet but steady. Would you teach me how to drive?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something warmer. "Course I will. Never learned?" She shook her head. "The commune didn't allow women to drive. Said it gave us too much independence." Hawk's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "We can head out after breakfast. Got some quiet roads nearby, perfect for learning." An hour later, they were parked on a rural road bordered by wildflowers and tall grass. Hawk helped Ilara adjust the seat and mirrors in his truck, explaining each control with patient detail. His voice remained steady and encouraging as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with nervous tension. "Easy now," he guided. "Just ease off the brakes slowly. The truck will move on its own first." Ilara felt the vehicle creep forward, her heart racing. But Hawk's presence beside her was calm and steady, his quiet instructions helping her focus. When she managed to keep the truck moving smoothly down the empty road for several minutes, pride bloomed in her chest. "I'm doing it," she whispered, amazed. "You sure are," Hawk agreed, and she caught the hint of a smile in his voice. After the driving lesson, they headed into town for groceries. The automatic doors of the supermarket whooshed open, and Ilara hesitated for a moment, overwhelmed by the choices before her. In the commune, food had been strictly regulated. Plain, minimal, often used as punishment or reward. "Take your time," Hawk said, grabbing a cart. "Get whatever looks good to you." Ilara moved through the aisles slowly, marveling at the freedom to choose. She picked up fresh fruit, running her fingers over the smooth skin of apples. Selected bread that looked soft and inviting. Even chose a bar of chocolate, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in the cart. "You don't need permission," Hawk reminded her gently, noticing her uncertainty. "It's your choice." In the afternoon, they drove to the clubhouse. Despite the tension from the previous day, several members were present, particularly the older ones. They watched curiously as Ilara moved quietly through the space, her presence somehow softening the rough edges of the room. When one member, a weathered man called Doc, came in with bloodied knuckles from a bike repair gone wrong, Ilara stepped forward without hesitation. "I can help with that," she offered softly. "If you'd like." Doc glanced at Hawk, then nodded. Ilara retrieved the first aid kit, her movements sure and practiced as she cleaned and bandaged the wounds. "Learned this in the commune," she explained quietly as she worked. "We weren't allowed proper medical care most times, so we helped each other when we could." The older members exchanged looks, something shifting in their understanding of her. By the time she finished with Doc's hand, the atmosphere had changed subtly, warmer, more accepting. As evening approached, Hawk and Alara returned to the cabin. He built a fire while she made tea, the domestic routine feeling surprisingly natural. They settled into comfortable chairs, the fireplace casting a gentle glow across the room. No words were needed. The silence between them felt right, peaceful. Alara cradled her tea mug, watching the flames dance. The day had been full of small victories, driving for the first time, choosing her own food, helping someone without fear of punishment. And through it all, Hawk had been there, a steady presence supporting her without pushing. The fire crackled softly, and Alara felt herself relax deeper into her chair. The silence wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket, neither feeling the need to fill it with unnecessary words. It was a kind of peace she'd never known in the commune, sitting quietly with another person without fear or tension. Hawk sipped his tea, his posture relaxed but alert, always the protector, even in these quiet moments. The evening settled around them, warm and secure, as the fire slowly burned lower in the hearth. The early morning sun filtered through the cabin windows as Alara sorted through the few clothes she owned, trying to find something suitable for the fundraiser. A week had passed since her first driving lesson, each day bringing small steps toward independence. "You sure you want to go?" Hawk asked from the doorway, his voice gentle. "Nobody expects you to help just because you're staying here." Alara turned, holding up a simple blue dress she'd managed to buy during their grocery run. "I want to," she said firmly. "The club does good things for the community. I'd like to be part of that." Hawk nodded, his expression softening. He rarely attended public events himself, preferring to work behind the scenes, but Alara's enthusiasm was hard to resist. The fairground was already bustling when they arrived that afternoon. Club members had set up carnival games, food stands, and activity stations to raise money for the local children's hospital. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm breeze, and the air smelled of popcorn and cotton candy. "Where do you want me?" Alara asked Bear, who was coordinating volunteers. He pointed to an empty face painting station. "Know anything about that?" Alara's eyes lit up. "I used to paint with berries and flowers in the commune, making natural dyes. I can do this." She settled into the chair behind the face painting table, arranging the supplies with careful precision. Hawk helped her set up an umbrella for shade, his movements protective even in this safe space. The first child approached tentatively, a little girl with pigtails who wanted a butterfly. As Alara worked, her brush strokes gentle and sure, she began humming softly. The girl giggled, relaxing under her careful attention. Word spread quickly among the children. Soon, a line formed at Alara's station, little ones drawn to her quiet warmth and patient smile. She painted tigers and unicorns, superheroes and flowers, each design accompanied by soft words of encouragement that made the children beam. Hawk watched from across the fairground, leaning against a post while pretending to supervise the motorcycle display. But his eyes kept returning to Alara, tracking the way she threw her head back in genuine laughter when a boy requested a motorcycle-riding dinosaur on his cheek. "She's good with them," Bear commented, appearing beside Hawk with 2 bottles of water. "Yeah," Hawk agreed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "She is." The afternoon wore on, golden sunshine giving way to the soft glow of evening. club members began stringing up lanterns, creating pools of warm light throughout the fairground. The atmosphere grew magical as darkness fell, music playing softly from speakers, while families lingered over carnival games and cotton candy. "Time for a break," Hawk said, approaching Alara's station with a plate of food. She had painted dozens of faces, each child leaving with a smile and often a hug. "Just one more," she promised, finishing a rainbow on a small girl's cheek. When she finally stood, stretching her back, Hawk noticed how relaxed she looked. No tension in her shoulders, no quick glances over her shoulder. She had been fully present in each moment, giving joy freely without fear of punishment. "Someone wants a photo for the club newsletter," Bear called out, waving a camera. "Mind standing together?" Hawk usually avoided photos, but Alara was already moving toward the lantern-lit archway. He followed, positioning himself beside her. Without thinking, he slipped his arm around her waist, then froze, remembering how physical touch often made her nervous. But Alara didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into his embrace, her body soft and trusting against his side. Bear snapped several photos as they stood together under the twinkling lights. "You look free," Hawk whispered. His words meant only for her. Alara tilted her face up to his, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I feel it," she admitted. "For the first time in my life, I feel free." The music shifted to something slow and sweet. Around them, families swayed together in the lantern light. Hawk's hand tightened slightly on Alara's waist, drawing her closer. When she met his gaze, the moment stretched between them like honey, warm, sweet, inevitable. Their first kiss was gentle, barely more than a brush of lips. Hawk let her set the pace, his touch remaining light and undemanding. But when Alara pressed closer, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened into something electric that made his heart stutter. They broke apart slowly, both a little dazed. The fundraiser continued around them, but for a moment, they existed in their own bubble of warmth and possibility. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than they'd shared before. Alara sat closer to him than usual, their hands occasionally brushing on the seat between them. Each accidental touch sent sparks through them both, but neither pulled away. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, leading them home. Alara hummed softly along with the radio, her voice carrying the same contentment she'd shown while painting children's faces. Hawk drove one-handed, leaving his other palm up on the seat, an invitation she accepted by lacing her fingers through his. They were different people than they'd been just hours ago, changed by laughter and trust, by the magic of lantern light and a kiss that tasted like freedom. The morning after the charity event dawned with golden promise. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, warming the wooden floors as Alara prepared coffee, humming the same tune from last night. Her contentment was almost tangible, filling the quiet kitchen with a gentle peace. Hawk watched her from the doorway, noting how she moved with more confidence now, claiming the space as her own. The memory of their kiss lingered between them, softening their usual morning routine into something sweeter. But by 11:30 in the morning, their world shattered. The first sign of trouble came through Hawk's phone. 3 missed calls from Bear. Before he could return them, a text message arrived with a video attachment. Hawk's face went pale as he watched it, his hands tightening around the device until his knuckles turned white. "What's wrong?" Alara asked, setting down her coffee mug. Instead of answering, Hawk played the video again, this time where she could see. The footage showed Lacey bound to a chair in a dim room, her usually fierce expression replaced by barely controlled fear. A masked figure stood behind her, holding a knife. "We have your club member," a distorted voice announced. Return Elara Wynn within 48 hours, or the Mountain Reapers clubhouse burns with everyone inside. Your friend here will watch it happen before we're done with her." Elara's legs gave out. She sank into a kitchen chair, her face draining of color. "No, no, no," she whispered. "Not Lacey. She's been so kind to me." Hawk's phone rang again. Bear this time. "What happened?" Hawk demanded, his voice tight with controlled rage. Through the speaker, Bear's words tumbled out, thick with anger and shock. "They grabbed her outside the grocery store. 4 men in a black van. I tried to stop them, but they had weapons. They knew exactly what they were doing, Hawk. This was planned." "Are you hurt?" "Couple of bruises. Nothing serious. But they're commune enforcers, no doubt about it. I recognized their tattoos, same ones Elara described." Hawk scrubbed a hand over his face. "Call everyone in, now." Within an hour, the clubhouse filled with angry voices and frightened faces. Members paced and argued, their usual camaraderie fracturing under the weight of fear. Elara stood in a corner, making herself as small as possible while accusations flew across the room. "This is what happens when you put one woman above the club," someone shouted. "They'll burn us out if we don't give her back. Lacey's one of us. We can't just abandon her." The tension built until it felt like a physical presence, pressing against everyone's chest. Bear tried to maintain order, but even his steady voice was drowned out by the growing chaos. "Enough!" Hawk's command cut through the noise like a blade. "This isn't helping Lacey." "No!" A senior member named Rico stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "What's not helping is you choosing some stranger over, your own brotherhood. We trusted you, Hawk. Now look where it's got us." More voices joined in, years of loyalty crumbling under fear and resentment. The club was splitting apart right before their eyes, brothers turning against brothers as the 48-hour deadline loomed. Elara pressed her hands against her mouth, trying to hold back sobs. Every accusation landed like a physical blow. These people had taken her in, however reluctantly, and now their lives were in danger because of her. Lacey, who had welcomed her without hesitation, was suffering because of her presence. The guilt became too much. A choked cry escaped her throat as she stumbled toward the door, needing to escape the hatred in their eyes. But Hawk caught her before she could flee, pulling her against his chest as she finally broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her words muffled against his shirt. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I'll go back. I have to go back. I can't let them hurt anyone else because of me." "No," Hawk's voice rumbled through his chest, fierce and certain. "That's not happening. But they'll kill her. They'll destroy everything you've built here." Elara's whole body shook with the force of her guilt and fear. "This is all my fault." The shouting continued around them, but Hawk remained steady, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other rubbed soothing circles on her back. He murmured quiet words of comfort, though they both knew the truth. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions that would keep everyone safe. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Elara until she could barely breathe. Every tear that fell, every trembling breath she took, carried the knowledge that her bid for freedom had put others in danger. Hawk held her through it all, his arms a fortress against the storm of blame and fear, but even his strength couldn't shield her from the crushing weight of her own guilt. As night fell outside the clubhouse windows, the angry voices gradually faded to tense murmurs. Members broke into small groups, some still arguing, others planning desperate strategies. But the damage was done. The trust that had bound them together for years had cracked, leaving them vulnerable and divided. In the midst of it all, Hawk continued to hold Elara as she trembled, his steady heartbeat a counterpoint to her ragged breathing. Neither of them spoke. There were no words big enough to contain their fear for Lacey, their worry for the club, or the impossible choice that lay before them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, counting down the hours until the commune's deadline. Each second that passed was another moment of Lacey in danger, another step closer to potential destruction. And through it all, Ilara's guilt grew heavier, threatening to crush not just her, but everything and everyone she had come to care about. The dawn crept through the cabin windows, with a heavy gray light that matched Ilara's mood. She hadn't slept more than a few minutes at a time, her mind replaying the anger and accusations from the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lacey's frightened face in the video message. Moving quietly through the house, she heard voices drifting up from the driveway. 2 club members, she recognized Tommy and Rico, were having a heated discussion by their bikes. "Look, I hate saying it," Tommy's voice carried through the morning air, "but maybe giving her back is the only way to save everything. The club, Lacey, all of it." "Hawk would never forgive us," Rico answered, but his tone was uncertain. "Better an angry president than a dead club." Ilara stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. They were right. As long as she stayed, everyone she cared about was in danger. Hawk had already risked too much for her: his leadership, his brother's trust, the peace he'd worked so hard to build. He deserved better than a life spent looking over his shoulder, protecting a woman who brought nothing but trouble. With trembling hands, she retrieved her backpack from the closet, the same one she'd carried when she first fled the commune. It felt like a lifetime ago now. She began folding her few possessions: the clothes Hawk had bought her, the notebook of poems she'd managed to keep hidden all these years. Tears blurred her vision as she searched for paper and a pen. The words came slowly, each one weighted with pain and gratitude. "Dear Hawk, you gave me something I never thought I'd have, a taste of real freedom. These past weeks have shown me what life could be, and I'll carry that gift forever. But I won't let my problems destroy everything you've built. The club needs you, your family needs you, and you deserve a peaceful life with someone who isn't hunted, someone who can stand beside you without bringing danger to your door. Thank you for showing me kindness when I needed it most. Thank you for teaching me that not all men are cruel. Most of all, thank you for letting me believe, even for a little while, that I could have a normal life. Please don't look for me. Take care of your family, rebuild trust with your brothers, and know that wherever I am, I'll never forget your goodness." She placed the note carefully on the bed, smoothing out the wrinkles. Her fingers lingered on the paper, touching the words as if they could somehow convey everything her heart couldn't express. The late afternoon sun was starting to soften when she finally gathered her courage. Hawk had left an hour ago to get supplies, and most of the club members were at the clubhouse planning search strategies for Lacey. It was the best chance she would have. Ilara took one last look around the cabin that had become her first real home. The worn leather couch where Hawk slept, the kitchen table where they'd shared quiet meals, the bookshelf filled with his sister's old novels. Every detail etched itself into her memory like a bittersweet photograph. The screen door creaked softly as she stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine needles and approaching autumn. She had only taken 3 steps when rough hands grabbed her from behind. A cloth pressed against her mouth, muffling her startled scream. She caught glimpses of black masks, felt multiple sets of hands restraining her as they dragged her toward a waiting van. Terror froze her blood. She recognized their efficient movements, their silent coordination. Commune enforcers, trained to retrieve strays like her. They shoved her into the van's dark interior. The door slammed shut, and the engine roared to life. As they drove away, Ilara curled into herself, her body shaking with silent sobs. At least this way, she told herself, Hawk would think she'd left by choice. He wouldn't risk himself trying to save her. He would be safe. 20 minutes later, Hawk's truck rumbled up the cabin's driveway. He carried bags of groceries, his mind already planning how to comfort Ilara through another difficult night. But the cabin felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. Too quiet. Too still. "Ilara?" His voice echoed through the empty rooms. The bedroom door stood open. His heart stuttered when he saw the neat bed, the empty closet, the folded note waiting like an accusation. His hands weren't quite steady as he picked up the paper, reading words that felt like knife wounds. Hawk sank onto the edge of the bed, the note crumpling slightly in his grip. The pain in his chest was unlike anything he'd felt before. Worse than broken bones, worse than losing brothers in fights. This was a deeper hurt, a hollowing out of something he hadn't even known he needed until Ilara showed up at his door. He sat there, as the room grew darker, holding the note that told him she was gone, that she thought he deserved better. The irony twisted in his gut like poison. He'd promised to protect her, to be her safe place, and instead he'd let her believe she was a burden he needed to be freed from. The silence of the cabin pressed in around him, heavy with all the words they'd never said, all the moments they'd never have. Hawk remained motionless on the bed, numb with regret, while outside the sun set on an empty driveway where tire tracks he hadn't yet noticed marked the truth of Ilara's departure, a truth very different from what her note suggested. The morning light crept through the cabin windows, finding Hawk still sitting in the kitchen, his untouched coffee gone cold. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ilara's note, felt the weight of her absence. His phone buzzed. Bear's name lit up the screen. "Yeah," Hawk answered, his voice rough. "You coming in? Club needs direction on the Lacey situation." Hawk pushed himself up from the chair. "On my way." The ride to the clubhouse felt mechanical. Hawk's body went through the motions while his mind kept circling back to Ilara's words. "You deserve better." The thought made his jaw clench. She had it backward. He was the one who hadn't deserved her trust. Bear waited outside the clubhouse, his usual stoic expression creasing with concern when he saw Hawk's face. "You look like hell, brother." "Ilara's gone." Hawk handed him the note, watching Bear's eyes scan the words. "Gone?" Bear's frown deepened. "That doesn't sound like her." "It doesn't matter what it sounds like. She made her choice." Bear shook his head slowly. "No, something's not right." He gestured toward the clubhouse. "Come on. We installed those security cameras around your cabin last week, remember? After the first threat." Hawk had forgotten about the cameras. Hope and dread warred in his chest as he followed Bear inside to the security room. The space was cramped, filled with monitors and the soft hum of electronics. Bear's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, pulling up yesterday's footage. "There," Bear muttered, pointing to a grainy image of Ilara stepping onto the porch. 4:47 p.m. They watched in growing horror as masked figures emerged from the tree line, moving with practiced precision. The attack was quick, efficient, clearly planned. Hawk's hands gripped the back of Bear's chair as he watched Ilara being dragged away, her struggles muffled by a cloth pressed to her face. "Son of a bitch," Bear breathed. "They took her." The hollow ache in Hawk's chest transformed into something harder, colder. A focused rage that made his vision sharpen and his thoughts crystallize. "She didn't leave. She was trying to protect us, and they grabbed her." Bear rewound the footage, studying the attacker's movements. "That's commune training. Same tactics they used on Lacey. They've probably been watching the cabin, waiting for a chance." Hawk was already pulling out his phone. "Call everyone, every single member. Emergency meeting in 30 minutes. Even the ones who voted against protecting her? Especially them. Hawk's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made Bear straighten. They need to see what their vote cost us. The next half hour was a blur of phone calls and tension. Members began arriving in twos and threes, some looking defensive, others uncertain. Hawk waited until the main room was full before playing the security footage on the large screen. Silence fell as they watched Ilara's abduction. When the video ended, Hawk looked at each face in turn. She wrote a goodbye note to protect us, to protect me, and while we were arguing about club politics, they were planning to take her. Shame colored several faces. Tommy, one of the loudest voices against Ilara, stepped forward. "I was wrong, Prez. We all were. What's the plan?" "First," Hawk said, "we find out where they're holding Lacey and Ilara." He spread a detailed map across the table. Everyone leaned in as he pointed to the commune compound, nestled in a remote valley. The commune has 3 main buildings surrounded by watchtowers. They'll keep hostages in the basement of the main hall. It's where they do their corrections. The word made several members shift uncomfortably, remembering Ilara's quiet stories about commune discipline. "We're going in?" Bear asked, though he already knew the answer. "We ride at dawn," Hawk confirmed, his voice low and lethal. His finger traced the access road leading to the compound. "They think they can take what's ours? They're about to learn exactly who they're dealing with." More members crowded around the map, the earlier division forgotten in the face of a clear enemy. Even those who had opposed helping Ilara now wore expressions of grim determination. This was no longer about one woman. It was about someone attacking their family, taking their own. Bear studied the compound layout. Security? Armed guards in the towers, electric fence, dogs. Hawk's voice was clinical, detached. But they're not expecting a full club response. They think we're divided. "We were," Tommy admitted. "Not anymore." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Hawk looked up from the map, meeting each gaze in turn. These were his brothers, his family. Despite their mistakes, their doubts, when it mattered most, they stood together. "Get your gear in order," he instructed. "Check your weapons, fuel your bikes. We roll out at first light." His attention returned to the map, memorizing every detail, every possible entry point. "And brothers, this isn't just about getting our people back. We're sending a message. No one touches our family. No one." The room emptied gradually as members left to prepare, determination replacing the earlier tension. Bear stayed behind, watching Hawk's intense focus on the map. "She's strong," Bear said quietly. "Stronger than any of us knew." Hawk's hand flattened against the paper, right over the compound's main building. "She shouldn't have had to be." His voice carried the weight of regret, of time wasted doubting when he should have been protecting. "But after tomorrow, she'll never have to be that strong again. Not alone." The clubhouse grew quiet as night settled in, but the atmosphere hummed with purpose. In garages and apartments across town, bikes were being checked, weapons cleaned, plans reviewed. And in the war room, Hawk remained stationed at the map, his eyes never leaving the compound layout, his mind focused on a single truth. Ilara hadn't abandoned them. She'd sacrificed herself to protect them. Now it was their turn to prove they deserved that sacrifice. Dawn was still hours away, but for the Mountain Reapers, the hunt had already begun. They would ride as one, united by a common cause, to bring their family home and to ensure the commune would never dare touch them again. The pre-dawn air bit cold and sharp as motorcycles lined up outside the clubhouse, their engines creating a low, steady rumble that seemed to match Hawk's heartbeat. 23 bikes in total. Not the full club, but enough. the loyal ones, the ones who understood what family really meant. Bear pulled up beside Hawk, his breath visible in the cold. "Communications team is ready. Tommy's got the wire cutters for the fence. Medical supplies are packed." Hawk nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the first hints of gold were starting to streak across the sky. His voice was steady, controlled. "Everyone knows their roles?" "Yes, boss. We hit their communications first, then the fence. Extraction team moves in while the rest create a diversion." Bear paused. "We'll get them both out." The convoy of bikes moved out like a dark tide, headlights cutting through the morning mist. They took back roads to avoid attention, the sound of their engines echoing off canyon walls. As they rode, Hawk's mind kept returning to the security footage. Ilara being dragged away, trying to protect them even then. The sun was just cresting the mountains when they reached the staging point, a mile from the compound. Hawk gathered everyone into a tight circle, speaking in low, precise tones. "Communications team, you're first. Take out their phone lines and radio tower. Fence team follows immediately after. Main force creates chaos at the front gate." He looked at each face in turn. "Bear and I take the rear entrance to the main hall. That's where they'll keep them." Tommy stepped forward, wire cutters ready. "What if they're not in the basement?" "They will be." Hawk's certainty was absolute. "It's where they break people, where they try to make them forget who they are." The first team moved out silently through the trees. Minutes ticked by, tension building, until a flash of light signaled success. Communications down. Tommy's team rushed the fence next, cutting quickly through the electrified wire after killing the power. That's when the first shouts came from the compound. Flashlight beams swept the grounds as commune guards emerged, armed but clearly surprised by the scale of the assault. "Now!" Hawk commanded, and the main force roared toward the front gates. Smoke bombs flew, creating chaos. Shouts and running feet filled the air as the commune's security scattered, unprepared for this level of organized resistance. Hawk and Bear slipped through the chaos, moving like shadows toward the main hall's rear entrance. Inside, emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow. They encountered 2 guards, quickly subdued them without noise. The basement door was locked. One kick from Bear changed that. The basement corridor stretched long and dark, lined with doors. Hawk's heart pounded as they checked each one. Empty. Empty. Then, "In here!" Bear called softly, finding Lacey first. She was bruised but alert, her eyes fierce with relief. 2 doors down, Hawk found her. Ilara was curled in the corner of a bare room, wrists bound with rope, her face tear-streaked but unbroken. When she saw him, a sob caught in her throat. "I came for you," Hawk whispered, quickly cutting her bonds. His hands were gentle as he helped her stand, checking for injuries. "I will always come for you." Ilara collapsed against him, trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought if I left." "Never again," he cut her off, voice rough with emotion. "Your family now. We protect our own." Outside, engines roared and shouts echoed. Bear appeared in the doorway with Lacey. "Time to move, boss. They're running." They emerged into chaos. Smoke filled the compound yard as commune leaders fled into the surrounding woods, their control broken. The Mountain Reapers had formed a protective corridor to their bikes, and Hawk kept Ilara close as they ran through it. He lifted her onto his bike, felt her arms wrap tight around his waist. Bear had Lacey safely on his. The rest of the club fell in around them as they roared away from the compound, leaving behind the wreckage of the commune's power. Ilara pressed her face against Hawk's back as they rode, her tears soaking into his leather cut. But these weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of relief, of belonging, of finally being truly free. The morning sun climbed higher as the group of motorcycles thundered back into town. Dust and fatigue clung to everyone, but relief lightened their faces. At Hawk's insistence, they headed straight to the Mountain View Medical Clinic, where Dr. Sarah Chen was already waiting, having been alerted by Bear's earlier call. "I'm fine," Ilara protested weakly as Hawk helped her off his bike, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "Let them check you over," he murmured, his arms steady around her waist as they walked inside. He didn't leave her side once, even when the nurses tried to shoo him out of the examination room. In the next room, Lacey's reunion with her husband Rick was tearful and loud, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," Rick kept saying, while Lacey's laughter mixed with sobs. The examination revealed only minor injuries, bruises, rope burns on Ilara's wrists, and exhaustion. Dr. Chen prescribed rest and gave her some cream for the burns. Through it all, Hawk remained a quiet, protective presence, his eyes never leaving Ilara's face. As evening approached, Hawk drove them home to the cabin in his truck. Ilara sat silent, her hands twisting in her lap. The familiar sight of the cabin should have brought comfort, but anxiety gnawed at her. Surely now, after everything, he would realize she wasn't worth the trouble. Inside, she stood in the middle of the living room, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "All of this happened because of me. The club splitting, Lacey getting hurt." But before she could continue, Hawk stepped closer. His calloused hands gently cupped her face, tilting it up until she had to look at him. His eyes were soft, holding none of the blame she'd feared. "Freedom isn't running," he said, quietly, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Freedom is knowing someone will come for you." The gentleness in his voice broke something inside her. "I left because I thought I was ruining your life," she confessed, tears flowing freely now. "You deserve peace, not constant danger because of me." "You're the best thing that's happened to me in years," Hawk said firmly. "Don't you understand that?" Ilara looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes. Her heart swelled with something that felt like hope, like belonging, like love. "Then I choose freedom," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I choose you." The evidence Lacey and Hawk gathered during the rescue proved devastating for the commune. Within 3 days, police cruisers and federal agents swarmed the compound. They uncovered years of financial fraud, abuse, and human trafficking. The leaders who had fled into the woods were caught trying to cross state lines. Back in town, the Mountain Reapers gathered for a somber meeting. The club members who had doubted Ilara approached Hawk one by one, offering sincere apologies. Bear stood up and formally asked Hawk to return as president, but Hawk shook his head with a gentle smile. "I found something better than power," he said quietly, his hand finding Ilara's. "I choose peace." The weeks that followed felt like a dream to Ilara. Each morning began with coffee on the porch, watching sunrise paint the mountains gold. Hawk taught her to drive with endless patience, never flinching when she ground the gears or took turns too wide. In the evenings, they sat side by side on the porch swing, sharing books and comfortable silence. One sunny afternoon, as golden light streamed through the pine trees, Hawk knelt in front of her chair. His hands trembled slightly as he held out a simple silver ring. "Marry me?" he asked softly. "For real this time?" Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They held their vow renewal in the town square's white gazebo. Flowers and fairy lights transformed the space into something magical. The Mountain Reapers attended in cleaned-up leather cuts, standing alongside townspeople who had once crossed the street to avoid them. Lacey, serving as matron of honor, couldn't stop grinning. When the music started for their first dance, Hawk pulled Alara close. His touch was gentle, just as it had been that first day at the courthouse. "Tell me when it's too much," he whispered, his familiar words now a tender reminder of how far they'd come. Alara smiled, resting her head against his chest, where she could hear his steady heartbeat. "It never is," she murmured. "Not with you." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.